Welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. I should start with an apology, which is that you probably or may not have noticed that I missed a daily update. This will be a double day review. Hopefully you'll forgive me. I've not been terribly well, and it's been, I think this is now my 14th working day in a row, and the fatigue of a Grand Slam does not just apply to players, it also applies to people working at them, and I include myself in that. So you will hopefully forgive me for missing one night and move past it. Change, heal and grow, I believe is the phrase. So I will start with a look back at Tuesday, which was, I believe, day 10. Just doing the maths there. It's always confusing because the French Open starts on a Sunday. Usually, because most Grand Slams start on a Monday, you can quite easily just sort of go, it's the second Tuesday, so it's 7 plus 2, easy, fine. But I haven't quite got my head round that particular piece of maths yet. So, yes, day, I already have forgotten what day it was, 8, 9, 10, which was a quarterfinals day, the first quarterfinals day, and a dramatic one for lots of different reasons. There wasn't much to be said in Djokovic versus Khachanov, as you might expect, other than that to say that Djokovic dropped his first set of the tournament, which was the first one. I asked him about it afterwards, and he said that he felt like he'd left part of himself in the locker room, which probably about sums it up. He was pretty slow out the gates, but then, and actually second set wasn't perfect either, but he then did play the perfect tiebreak. So, in all fairness, he found his perfection eventually, and then 6-2, 6-4 the last two sets. So, he can say that he was sluggish out the gate, and that's certainly true. But overall, he was looking pretty good. But not as good as Carlos Alcaraz was looking against Stefanos Tsitsipas, who I think the first set is the best set of tennis I've seen anyone play in a long time. It was 6-2, it was about 35 minutes, and it was just like everything he did came off. It was ridiculous. The level this guy can play when he's playing really well. I mean, there are times when you watch Djokovic, and I'll tell you a stat about Djokovic. He's not made an unforced error in a tiebreak yet this tournament. And he's played 5 breakers. Ridiculous. But Djokovic is really the only guy I can remember in any sort of recent times playing this kind of level of almost perfection. Like, that really is the only word. It is quite close to perfection. And he was 2 sets up within an hour. Tsitsipas kind of rallied a bit in the third set, took it to a tie break. But again, the Tsitsipas backhand is just a mess. Afterwards, he said that he's been struggling with his sleep schedule and that he's been taking melatonin pills to try and manage that and regulate it, and that it made him feel sluggish for the first 2 sets, and that may well be true, but melatonin pills didn't make his backhand the way it is. Every time in the ad court, pretty much, and I haven't got the stats to back this up, but at least anecdotally, every time Alcaraz is serving to the ad court, he would just kick it to Tsitsipas' backhand, and he would miss. It was just silly. Like, it was the same in Barcelona when Alcaraz smashed him in the final, just destroyed his backhand, and it was the same here. Like, he just had so little to offer on that wing. And, I wrote a column afterwards saying Stefanos Tsitsipas is no closer to winning a Grand Slam than the first time he made it to a quarter-final in Australia 4 years ago, when he beat Bautista Agut and was then gubbed by Nadal in the semis 4-2 in love. He maybe, I'm sure he has made progress, but against the norm, against the average, he has arguably gone backwards. Alcaraz has comfortably overtaken him. He's got a convincing head-to-head record over him. I think it's 4-0 now. And, is Stefanos Tsitsipas more likely to win a Grand Slam than Daniil Medvedev? I don't think so. Than Alexander Zverev? I don't think so. Certainly not than Alcaraz and Djokovic. I mean, he's well past that, below that tier. Nadal obviously is kind of in a category of his own at the moment. I would probably put Stefanos Tsitsipas in, I don't know, the Andrei Rublev bracket, where I'm not convinced that on merit Andrei Rublev wins a slam. I can see if the draw really opens up, and once Djokovic is retired, that there might be a time when he could sneak one, on a hard court maybe. But that's the kind of bracket I'd put Tsitsipas in now. That, there was a time, and look, this is ridiculous because he's reached 2 Grand Slam finals in, the last 3 years. But, like, performances like that, and they're not, they're not unique, that's not a one-off, makes it hard to believe that he's ever going to, win 7 slam matches in a row. The other 2 matches on Tuesday were the women's quarterfinals. Karolina Muchova beat Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova. Struggled to draw much from that match, to be honest. Great for Pavlyuchenkova to be back fit and playing at a high level. She obviously made the final here 2 years ago and lost to Barbora Krejcikova. But Karolina Muchova is a very good player, and she will be a tricky unseeded semi-final opponent for Aryna Sabalenka, who beat Elina Svitolina 6-4, 6-4. It was a pretty decent match, actually. Svitolina's got good rally resistance. She's got a great sort of jumping backhand, which I really enjoyed. And, she made Sabalenka play well. I think that's the probably best way of putting it. Sabalenka didn't play very well against Sloane Stephens, but she had to play well against Svitolina, who, like I said, she got a lot of balls back. She ran hard. She's, for someone who only really come back, 4 or 5 months ago, she's incredibly fit and really physical. That's credit to her. And actually, Sabalenka did say that afterwards. She said, I really respect her for that. The controversial moment came at the end, where obviously match point sealed, game set match Sabalenka, and she stood at the net and waited for a handshake. Now she must know that Svitolina was never going to shake her hand. She hasn't shaken hands with her 2 Russian opponents. She had said quite clearly she wasn't going to shake hands with a Russian or Belarusian player, and Sabalenka sort of leaned on the net and waited for her. Svitolina kept her head down and walked straight to her chair, and of course was booed because, I don't know why, because it's Paris, and they don't, how can you not know what's going on? Or maybe they just disagree with her, I don't know, but, it happened to Kostyuk when she played Sabalenka in the first round. It happened to Kasatkina when she played Svitolina. And Kasatkina tried to avoid any awkwardness by just sort of marching directly to the umpire and then giving Svitolina a thumbs up, and she gave a thumbs up back. And the crowd, I guess, missed that. I don't know. I really don't know why the Parisian crowd find this so hard to get their head round, but they do. But I also think, and Elina Svitolina agreed with me, that Sabalenka inflamed the situation by standing there waiting for a handshake that was never coming. Now, Sabalenka said afterwards, because she did do a press conference for the first time in a week, that she was acting on instinct. She was just like she would every other match. I try to take players at face value whenever I can. I don't believe Aryna Sabalenka on that particular occasion, because how could she not know? And it was also it was a very emotionally charged match. There was a really high level of intensity. Like, there were a lot of big fist pumps straight down the court, particularly from Sabalenka, I should say. And I don't really believe that in that moment she forgot, because it wasn't just that she went to the net and went, oh no, hang on, that's not what we're doing today, and then sort of turned to the umpire. She went to the net, she leant on the net cord, and stared at Svitolina. And then, when Svitolina finally got to her chair, Sabalenka kind of accepted it and gave a little sort of, shrug or whatever. I don't know. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I don't think I can here. I think she knew what she was doing, and I think she was on the wind-up. And she knew she'd get the crowd to boo her. It's a pretty sad situation, really, overall. Yeah, not great. But I guess if there is a positive, it's that Aryna Sabalenka came out afterwards and was asked a very direct question about the photos with Alexander Lukashenko and her support for Alexander Lukashenko. She said that she has photos. He came to some Fed Cup matches and posed photos with the team, and I think actually she's met Alexander Lukashenko more than that, and that that is kind of selective answering. But that's fine. That happens. The thing that she said, which I think will resonate, is she was asked, you say you don't support war, but do you still support Alexander Lukashenko? She said, it's a tough question. I mean, I don't support war, meaning I don't support Lukashenko right now. Now, lots of people have kind of focused in on the words right now. I think... What do I think? I think it's unfair to scrutinise the minutiae of the detail of what she says, because her English isn't perfect. It's kind of, I think it's just unfair to do that. That said, it is true that clearly she has supported Lukashenko in the past. In her words, when nothing bad was going on in Belarus or Ukraine. I mean, Lukashenko's been doing bad things in Belarus for a long time. It's not new. He is Europe's last dictator. He had allegedly free and fair elections in 2020. They were not free or fair, and the violent reaction to the protests afterwards was not free or fair, and it was violating human rights acts. But, he also has a very strong propaganda machine, and, there are allegations about how close Sabalenka's partner is to him, and, I can see that probably she just believes what these people tell her, and, I'm trying to be a bit sympathetic, as well as also acknowledging that she is by no means perfect, and I think has at best been poorly advised throughout all of this. The comment about not feeling safe, I think, was pretty inflammatory. If you're Ukrainian, you read Aryna Sabalenka saying she doesn't feel safe in a press conference. I think it's right to come back to press conferences and face the music a bit, and I think she spoke quite well overall. And I think we gave her a due as well. She wasn't, I think, bullied, as some people would say, or I don't think she was asked any unfair questions. She spoke about, feeling the pressure. She said she was struggling to sleep because of what has happened over the last couple of days. That's a bit of a theme that's emerging, players and sleep. Been hard work for her, I can see that. Not entirely self-inflicted, but partly self-inflicted. She's into the semi-finals. She'll play Karolina Muchova. We'll see how that goes. She's favourite to win it and set up a final with, and we can now move on to Wednesday, Iga Swiatek, who beat Coco Gauff in straight sets for the 7th time in a row. I mean, scarcely believable that a player who we know is so good in Coco Gauff, Swiatek has such a hoodoo over her. It's incredible. I think since the first set they played, which went to a tiebreak, I think I'm right in saying, that she's not even got to a tiebreak. She averages 2.5 games per set off Swiatek, Coco Gauff. I should say, of all the matches between them that I've seen, I can't think how many of the 7 I've seen, but, when I compare it to last year's final, for example, I think this is one of Coco Gauff's best performances against Iga Swiatek. She only won 6 games, which is probably a demonstration of how low the bar is in terms of Coco Gauff's best performance against Iga Swiatek. But I think first set she fought very hard, 4-all, 30-all on the Swiatek serve in the first set. It was there for the taking, but to be fair, Swiatek struck the ball really well. She zeroed in on the elements that she knows she can take advantage of. She was all over Gauff's second serve when she got the opportunity. I mean, Gauff's second serve is not great. And there are a couple of, 70-mile-an-hour short serves into the middle of the box. And it's like, well, see ya. Well, no one's going to put them away for breakfast. And, yeah, she did so. And then she broke Gauff at 4-5, to love. Absolutely crucial moment for it. Took the first set, and then I think it did get away from Gauff a bit. Thought her head went a little bit, and in the press conference afterwards, she said, someone said, "Oh, you seem a bit more at peace with this result," and she said, "Well, I tell you what, I'm not. I'm gutted, but I don't want these pictures of me crying all over the internet again." Like, obviously after her defeat in Australia, she was very tearful, and she did well up a couple of times in the press conference, and I think maybe one tear might have escaped her eyes. They certainly glistened with tears. But, she's such an impressive person, Coco Gauff, because, she's 19 years old. She bloody hates losing, and all she wanted to do was go home, order room service, and cry. But she fronted up and said, I had a different tactical plan today and it didn't work. It worked a bit, but it didn't work. I've got to do better. And her different tactical plan, it seemed, was to kind of loop the forehand into the Swiatek backhand, try and utilise the wind a little bit, try and put a bit more height on that ball, make Swiatek generate the pace. I think that did work. I think something Swiatek's very, very good at is taking pace, coming from the other end and returning it with interest. But I think probably she's less strong when having to generate the pace herself. So I think that's a good piece of tactical ID to play that game. And she stuck to it for the most part. It also has the advantage of kind of taking away some of the risk on the Gauff forehand, which is the big weakness. She was hitting these big spinny high forehands instead, which go wrong less. The problem is they've got to be deep, and when they're short, Swiatek is good enough to pick them off. So, it's an idea, and it may well work in the future. But once again, 7-0, 14 sets in a row. Not great news for Coco Gauff. Swiatek's into the semi-finals. She will play the first Brazilian Grand Slam semi-finalist in the women's singles for 55 years, which is a staggering stat, given that Brazil is one of the most populous countries in the world and has a pretty reasonable tennis culture. Doesn't, as I've often said, have a Masters 1000 tournament, which is a travesty. But, is what it is. But yeah, great for Beatriz Haddad Maia. She fought really hard against Ons Jabeur. She was down a set. And yeah, battled brilliantly. She's now spent, it's an incredible stat actually, 12.5 hours on court. Compared to her semi-final opponent Swiatek, who has spent just over 5.5. I mean, it's just ridiculous how dominant Swiatek has been and how hard Haddad Maia has had to work to be here. In fairness, she didn't look particularly fatigued. Maybe semi-final is where that energy runs out, especially as she only has this one-day turnaround from her match on Wednesday to the semis on Thursday. So that surely will play into Swiatek's hands, having that short turnaround. But we'll see. I hope it's a decent match. I really think we need to see Swiatek tested. My concern is that Haddad Maia is, a scrapper, a runner, and I don't know that that's the type of player that beats Swiatek very often. You think about the players who've got good matchups with her. It's Rybakina, it's Elena Ostapenko, who has a very good record against Swiatek. Sabalenka, players who can... Actually, I don't know, what is Sabalenka's head-to-head record with Swiatek? I just said that kind of on the assumption that it's good. And off the top of my head, I actually can't think what it is. So I'm looking it up. But anyway, it's players who can take the racket out of her hand. It's 5-3 in Swiatek's favour. So yes, that is by comparison with lots of other players, that's a pretty decent record for Sabalenka. So essentially, it's players who can take the racket out of her hand most of the time. That's the sort of rule of thumb. And I don't know that Haddad Maia can do that. I do know that they practiced together day before the tournament. So that'll create some, bit of history. And they know each other. They played in Toronto, I think. Swiatek mentioned it was a pretty windy day that day, and it probably will be quite windy again in their semi. So that'll be quite intriguing to see. And then, we still expect, I think, to see number 1 and number 2 seed in the final. So, and I think that'll be a good match as well, to be fair. I think it's a match that the women's draw deserves. Not that Haddad Maia and Muchova wouldn't deserve to be there if they won their semis, but, I think we'd struggle to sell that back home, I'll tell you that much. And then we move finally on to the last 2 men's quarter-finals, which featured Alexander Zverev against Thomas Martin Etcheverry and Casper Ruud against Holger Rune. I'll take them as they went. Zverev against Etcheverry, who took a set off the German, which I believe no one's been able to do thus far. Oh, Tiafoe took a set, didn't he? But not many people have. Obviously, it's been the fortnight of Etcheverry's dreams. Never made it this far. Unseeded player. Clearly can play. He played some really good tennis against Zverev and more than held his own. I think he's going to be number 32 in the world, I think. Off the back of that performance, career high. Could well be seeded at Wimbledon. Not that I think grass will necessarily be his service by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, he's a good tennis player, and he gave Zverev a good go, but the guy is playing very well at the moment, and served it out with relative ease, quite frankly. So, And then in the evening, it was the Rune-Ruud rematch. By no means, nowhere near as fractious as last year. I haven't heard of any locker room yars, but I think what happened was slightly predictable, that Rune's legs ran out, to be honest. He's played a lot of tennis this year. He looked pretty knackered in Rome, I thought, and then obviously had a week off before the French Open, but then played a 5-setter against Cerundolo, and I think just he's 19 years old, and that sort of endurance, physicality takes time to come, and Rune will be back at this stage again. But Casper Ruud, who's been out of form this year, but did make 2 Grand Slam finals last year, and he's into another semi. He just keeps... No, he's not the most famous bloke in the world, he's not the most extravagant bloke in the world, but he can bloody play tennis. And he served really well, and I think that's... someone said to me, that's the big point differential between Ruud and Rune at the moment. I think it probably is. Ruud's serve is much better, and he was able to lean on that, deep in the match when it got cold and heavy and slow and tiring. So, that's where you have it. And which brings us on to today, the semi-finals, which you may already have watched, or maybe be watching as you listen to this, which would be quite a fun way to do it. First is Muchova against Sabalenka, then Swiatek against Haddad Maia. I think both matches will have elements of interest. I hope Muchova gives Sabalenka a good challenge, because I think that could be a nice test for Sabalenka, who hasn't really been tested that much in the tournament so far. And the same for Swiatek. I sort of hope they both go 3 sets and that Sabalenka and Swiatek win, because I think that'd be the best final. But they both could do with a little test. So yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. I will be back to talk about Alcaraz versus Djokovic, which will be on Friday. We don't yet know. I think I'm just about to check the system and see whether we know the order of play for Friday yet. I suspect we don't, because it usually comes out sort of lunchtime for the next day. But in all likelihood, Djokovic Alcaraz will be first on. Oh, not first on. It'll be the first of the 2 men's semi-finals on Friday, which would make it 1:45 p.m. in the UK. And you can kind of work backwards from that, depending on your time zone. It'll be a cracking match. It's obviously the matchup everyone wanted. I know that's no disrespect to anyone else, but they're the 2 best players in the world, and they've only played once, and that was over a year ago. So it's about time that they got this rivalry going, and it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out. Apologies once again for this being slightly late, but please do come back tomorrow.
Sports Social Podcast Network.